A vintage model traction engine restoration part 6, investigating the knocking problem. The customer originally mentioned that the engine knocks as it runs, and this was definitely not helped by making a new small end bush that was not a rattle fit. I've seen and heard this problem many times before, so there's nothing new here. I'm fairly certain that the piston is hitting the front cylinder cover. Time to take it apart. First problem encountered, the union nut was very tight on the fitting that screws into the block, and for that reason I've used a very thin spanner to hold it in position while I undo the union nut. The more I look at this traction engine, the more I'm personally convinced it is a Basstett-Lowke model. Basstett-Lowke steam engines usually had the steam chest milled out from a solid block, as opposed to having a separate steam chest with a cover on the top of it. Why am I taking the steam chest off to have a look at the piston problem? Well, if you look at the displacement lubricator on the right hand side, it's very much in the way of the cylinder cover. So the only solution is to remove the steam chest. After I removed the fixings, I lifted the entire assembly, including the lubricator, off the cylinder block. And here it is, complete with a very bent regulator valve spindle. I think this valve spindle is made of some stuff called German silver, which was very common on Basstett-Lowke models. With the steam chest and displacement lubricator safely out of the way, I have good access now to the cylinder cover. It looks like it's held in place to the cylinder with one 4BA countersunk screw. And once I remove the cover, this is what I find underneath. A definite modification. These bolts look very much like M5 commercial bolts that you can buy today. And I'm really pleased that they're hidden under the cylinder cover because they look far too big. In the world of models and miniatures, it's really a good idea to try and get the scale somewhere near, and bolts around cylinder covers are generally not as big as this. First of all, I slackened all of the bolts using a small spanner, and then to remove them, I used this socket wrench. And in no time at all of the bolts were removed. And in this clip, if you look at the marks around the holes, you can see that the original bolts that once held this cylinder cover to the cylinder were much smaller than the big ones I've just removed. Usual method for unsticking cylinder covers, a Stanley knife blade. Health and safety notice, I don't recommend doing this because it's dangerous. I'm doing it this way because it's the only excitement I get in my life these days. A gentle tap with a hammer loosens the cylinder cover. And surprise, surprise, here is the problem. Look at the length of the piston rod sticking out from the piston. There is a recess in the cylinder cover to accommodate this, but when the outer cover is held in place with the countersunk 4BA bolt, the end of the piston rod collides with it, but only just. So what's the solution? I know, I'll saw it off. Very carefully. It's always a good idea to put something below the blade when you're sawing. So as the hacksaw blade breaks through the part that you're cutting, it doesn't damage anything below it. I couldn't live with leaving the end of the piston rod rough sawn, so here I am cleaning up the saw cut using my prox and angle grinder. And after I cleaned up the end of the piston rod, I cleaned up the area around the piston, starting with my airline to blow any bits and pieces out of the way. After thoroughly cleaning the area using a cloth and some panel wipe, etc., I refitted the cylinder cover. And once again, I did find the socket wrench very useful for this. But when you're using tools like this on models, be very, very careful. These bolts shear off very easily. Things are really to scale. If you look at the size of this socket wrench, and imagine you're doing this on a full-size traction engine, a socket wrench of this length would probably take 2 men to lift it if it was full-size. So make sure you have a gentle touch with tools like this when using them on models. I used some Boss White type sealing compound on the gasket, so here I'm wiping off the surplus, and now I can refit the outer cover. And the one screw that holds it in place will no longer interfere with the piston. I thought I would take this opportunity to straighten the valve spindle that operates the regulator because it's very bent, and it's bent in many different places along its length. This is far too fragile an item to spin it in the chuck and hit it with a hammer in the normal manner. I'm straightening it by hand and then spinning it up as a reference. And by repeating this process all along its length, eventually the part becomes a little bit better. It really is bent in many different areas. And once again, to make a success of this job, you need to have a delicate touch. When I was younger, I always wanted to be a surgeon, but instead I became a musician, and now I fix steam engines. I think the only reason I wanted to be a surgeon when I was younger was so I could cut people up while they were asleep. Anyway, that's enough of that. This is a view of the steam chest from underneath. And the slide valve is quite clever. It has two springs that hold it against the port face, which for a slide valve that's used as a traction engine regulator is a very good idea. I've applied plenty of steam oil to it, and now it's in position on the valve rod inside the steam chest. I've only loosely fitted the steam chest, I haven't put all the studs back in. No point really, because I have to remove the two studs with the nuts on and make a full new set. Time for a bit of high-speed painting. I'm applying some humbrol satin black paint to the differential cover on the large gear. If you remember, this was very rusty. The finish isn't brilliant, but then again the piece of metal isn't very good either. Most of it's inside the cover and the rest of it is behind the wheel. Well, I'm glad that's over, painting at that speed. Now it's time to check that everything's okay. There's still a little bit of tightness on the valve spindle for the regulator, but I'm not concerned with that for the moment, just listen to the engine. It still knocks a bit in the forward position, but I don't think this is going to be an issue. Don't forget the big end bearing isn't fully tightened up, but really it's not that. In common with a lot of traction engines, including my big one, the travel of the expansion link is excessive. If you're wondering what I'm doing at the moment, I'm just checking the tightness of the top bearings, because they're only held in position at the moment using 3 single slot machine screws. The engine reverses as it should, but when it's going in the forward direction, unlike my burl, the forward direction is when the flywheel is rotating the other way. You can see it better in this clip. I can't say much more on this video. I'm quite pleased with the way the restoration's going. I'll just leave it running to the end and say, as always, stay safe and well. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my main Steam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.